I have a saying that's on it's a sort of a credo of mine. And it's not original to me. I was driving one day in Los Angeles, and I saw on a bumper sticker ahead of me the words, "Find the good and praise it." And I believe in that. So I guess what I would like to be most remembered for is the fact that in my writing, in my efforts, as much as I could, I tried to find the good and praise it.
Alexander Murray Palmer Haley was born in Ithaca, New York, to Simon and Bertha George Haley on August 11th, 1921.
He went to Cornell, married my mother, whom he had met in the choir in Lane. And my grandfather, my mother's father, was so taken by all this marvelous education and springing up that he had, among the other things at the wedding, he had the Lane College choir bust to the wedding, and they sang, and it was just too much, and I was in the wings at this time. And I made my appearance in Ithaca, where my father was at Cornell getting his master's. My mother was at Ithaca School of, Ithaca Conservatory, studying piano. And then I was born, they brought me back to Tennessee.
Haley grew up in Henning, Tennessee, a town of around 600 residents, some 50 miles north of Memphis.
It was a quaint little town that had lots of people, interesting people in the town. You had doctors, you had educators, dirt roads, and I saw pictures of the T model cars that they would buy.
It was here, at the home of his grandparents, Will and Cynthia Palmer, that Alex discovered his love for storytelling.
You just sit there with your mouth open, listening to your venerated grandfather tell with a measured cadence the stories that had come down. And he might sometimes, if you really wanted a thrill, talk about when he was a boy your age and what happened. And you kind of got this vague picture of, my golly, we go back to the Ark. It sounded like it. And what was really happening on that front porch or in those living rooms those Sundays, early afternoon as a rule, was that the culture of that area was filtering down from the mouths of the elders.
Will Palmer grew ill in 1926. The owner of a local lumber company, he eventually succumbed to his ailments while in his bed at home. Upon witnessing this, young Alex ran down the street to his father, who was tending to the lumber company, screaming that his grandfather had passed away.
There's a saying in Africa, West Africa anyway, that when an old man dies, and an old woman would be as well, it is as if a library has burned to the ground.
Following Will's passing, grandmother Cynthia invited all 5 of her sisters to stay the summer at the Palmer home.
He would sit on the front porch, and they would always be there. That was their place of reference, that they would sit out on the front porch a lot of times. And during that time, the elders would be talking, and a lot of times they would repeat the oral history of their family. And he would just be there, and he would just be tentatively listening to them. And that's where he heard a lot of his stories.
If Alex had any questions about the stories he heard from his aunts on the front porch, he would wait until his grandmother was preparing meals in the kitchen and ask in between bites of what was on the day's menu.
She would talk to me about we talked about every manner of thing. I guess that's when the closeness between my grandmother and me really developed, was over that kitchen work table. That's where she told me about Chicken George, and she told me about the African and so on.
Haley would go on to get his formative education, graduating high school 2 years early with a C average at the age of 15. From there, he went on to Alcorn State University, one of his father's alma maters.
He went there, if I'm not mistaken, for a year. And then after that, he transferred to another college in North Carolina. But his father wanted him to have some kind of structure, so he asked him to join the military, and that's when he went into the Coast Guard.
He originally said that he liked the uniforms of the Coast Guard the best, and that's why he picked the service. Later on in an interview, he said that the Coast Guard had 3-year enlistments as opposed to 4-year enlistments, and that's really what kind of drove him to our service.
Enlisting in 1939, Alex began his career at sea, stationed on the United States Coast Guard cutter Mendota. Unfortunately, there weren't a lot of job opportunities waiting for Haley once he got there.
He was initially a mess attendant. For African Americans, you were very restricted on what jobs you could hold. Mess attendant was one of those you could do. And it's not very glamorous work. We still have it in the Coast Guard today. It's usually for our junior members, but you do a lot of meal prep to kind of get the mess deck ready for the meals. You do a lot of cleaning, so you'll do the dishes afterwards. And you also do a lot of janitorial jobs.
Haley took his new assignment in stride and found himself quickly advancing up the ranks within the Coast Guard.
Within a year or two, he was on a different ship where he learned how to be a steward's mate and did a lot more of the actual cooking for the ship, and was actually a first-class petty officer very quickly, and that's where he went to the Coast Guard cutter Mirzim, and that's really when his kind of writing career took off.
Something about water, just generally. But for me, my thing, I think it has to do with that I actually learned to write at sea. When I was in the U.S. Coast Guard, I was on ships, and I was a cook. And when I began writing, the only time I had to try and write, when I say began writing, I began trying to learn to write, the only time I had was at night, because I cooked all day.
Armed with his typewriter, Alex spent his nights on the Atlantic Ocean, writing romance stories and articles about the Coast Guard with the hopes of them being published, a goal that would elude him for some time. Alex's direct supervisor, Petty Officer Percival Scott, known to the service as Scotty, took notice of Haley's time at the Keys and formed an idea.
He would talk quite a bit, and so he would have Alex kind of type up letters to his friends. He would dictate to Alex, and Alex would type them up, and Alex would send them off. And it was just a very easy way for Scotty to keep in contact with all of his buddies in the service and back home.
Alex and Scotty's relationship proved pivotal in Haley's early writing career. One of Haley's crewmates received a Dear John letter. Scotty implored Alex to write a letter back to his mate's partner.
If you remember, Alex was typing all these romance stories, so he had lots of great just kind of prose to put in there, and Scotty was just a very personal person as well. And between the three of them, they were able to save the relationship.
Word got around the cutter of Haley's way with words, and soon after his first romantic writing endeavor, he began charging his crewmates a fee to write letters to their loved ones. It was during this time that Alex noticed something missing from his particular cutter.
He saw that they didn't have a ship's newspaper. He enjoyed writing, and so he kind of saw that as his outlet to start the Seafarer, which is what the ship's paper was named.
It was within the pages of the Seafarer that Haley finally got the literary recognition he'd been working so hard for, even if it was unintentional. When Alex noticed that some of his shipmates weren't receiving letters during mail call and the effect it had on them, he wrote an article in the newspaper to encourage families of Coast Guard members to send letters to their loved ones at sea.
The original article was meant for the Seafarer, and that's where it was published. But what ended up happening was a lot of people, when they sent their letters home, they would include a copy of the ship's newsletter so that their friends and family could see and read about what was going on the ship. One of the people who received the Seafarer actually sent the article to their hometown newspaper, and it was published, and it became very popular. It just kind of scattered around and got reprinted by a number of newspapers, all kind of giving him, Alex Haley, the credit. So Alex Haley's name was out there for this mail call that was kind of creating a movement, if you will, to keep in contact with sailors and soldiers who were fighting a war overseas.
In 1946, Alex gained rank once again, this time to Yeoman First Class Public Information in New York City.
And then in 1948, after the war, one of the things they did was they looked at the public relations offices and said, this has been a great benefit. It's really doing a lot for the service. Let's create its own rating. And they called that the journalist rating. So Alex was on the day they created that rating, Alex was part of that group of being the initial members of that rating in 1948.
From constant rejection, Alex found himself now selling 1 out of every 12 articles, then 1 out of every 6, then 4, and so on. In 1949, fellow writer Glenn Kittler approached Haley about information to write his own piece about the Coast Guard. Over the course of their lunch, Haley waxed poetic about his dreams of becoming a writer and his time spent in the military. Kittler informed Alex that the national publication Coronet magazine was looking to purchase 600-word, single-page articles, and Alex's stories about the Coast Guard would be a perfect fit for the periodical. By that Christmas, Haley had written 4 pieces for Coronet and sent them off to editor-in-chief Bernie Glasser. Around 3 weeks later, Haley received a call from Glasser, and the voice on the other end said, "Where have you been? We have a real need for this kind of stuff. We are going to buy 3 of your vignettes. The 4th one is lousy." Over the next 3 years, Haley wrote more than 30 articles for Coronet, most of them under pseudonyms, as he would get paid $125 instead of the standard $100 to print under a different name. Alex went on to gain the title of chief journalist within the Coast Guard before he was transferred to San Francisco.
Both San Francisco and New York really played a key role in Alex becoming the writer who he is, because New York being the center of news and San Francisco at the time really being kind of like an artist and poets kind of mecca for the West Coast. He kind of got both sides of like the practical and the artistic style of writing.
In 1954, Alex began his years-long relationship with Reader's Digest magazine with the June article, "The Harlem Nobody Knows." Haley was able to highlight the advancements made by African Americans in the area over the past 50 years and showed that Harlem had truly become a mecca for Black culture in the country.
Alex retired from the Coast Guard on June 1st, 1959, 20 years almost to the day of when he joined. There was no higher rank for him to go. Towards the end of his career, the Coast Guard was actually authorized to create the rank of Master Chief Petty Officer for the journalist rating. And the Coast Guard had initially recommended him to be considered for that job. And he was thankful for his time in the Coast Guard, but he was ready for that next step. So he politely declined the offer to become Master Chief and then since retired.
After his military retirement, Alex Haley moved back to New York into a one-room basement apartment at 92 Grove Street in Greenwich Village. Given his public relations background and daunted at the thought of earning a freelancer's salary, Alex began applying to the top 25 PR firms in the country. Having experienced racism while stationed in the western United States, Haley made sure to enclose a photograph of himself with his resume. Out of his 25 applications, only 2 were even acknowledged. Determined to still become a writer, Haley wrote for upwards of 18 hours a day. Many rejections still followed, and Alex found himself down to just 18 cents and 2 cans of sardines. Still, the budding author was undeterred.
He's basically spent the 1950s hustling. He was trying to create a lane for himself because at the time, the only publications that were featuring articles about Black America were Black publications. Haley saw an opportunity for himself as this up-and-coming Black writer in New York City who started to make also a lot of connections. And Reader's Digest at that time was the most read magazine in the country. And one of the features they always had was a profile about not so much a celebrity, but just someone who's interesting. And he started to write for Reader's Digest.
During his time in the Coast Guard, Haley heard rumblings of the Black Muslim movement happening in the country and its spokesperson, Malcolm X. Haley began gathering materials on the group in hopes of writing about them one day. For his new assignment, Alex dug out his old research, which led to the March 1960 article entitled "Mr. Muhammad Speaks," about the leader of the anti-white, anti-Christian Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad. The piece served as an unbiased, honest look at the Nation of Islam and allowed Alex to lay the foundation for his relationship with Malcolm X. The success of Mr. Muhammad Speaks led to Haley enjoying several more articles published within a plethora of the nation's largest publications over the next 3 years.
During this time, there was this new magazine that was coming online. It was a men's magazine. It started in Chicago, and the publisher was Hugh Hefner. And they wanted to expand the magazine. He didn't want the magazine to just be pornography. He wanted there to be actual content that readers would take seriously. He wanted to start this new thing in the magazine called, The Interview, which was essentially a Q&A, something that was not common at the time. Alex Haley somehow found his way meeting the editors of Playboy, and he said, look, I can get access to Miles Davis, who at the time was one of the most popular musicians, let alone jazz musicians.
Due to his reclusive nature and distrust of the media, Davis was oft regarded as a tough interview. The piece would be a big get for both Playboy and Haley. The interview, however, may have been a painful one for Alex.
In his off time, when he wasn't playing the trumpet, he was a boxer. And so Alex Haley found him in, I think he was boxing up in Harlem. And Haley walked in and said, look, I want to interview you for Playboy. And I think the only way that it worked was that Haley had to get in the ring with him. And they started boxing. And then Davis eventually did the interview.
Davis gave Haley rare insight into both his personal and professional life. The format Haley had come up with for his maiden voyage at Playboy would be used for years following the issue's release in September 1962. Through the remainder of the year, Haley conducted more interviews for Playboy. Given their success and popularity, Haley was offered an unaltered and unedited interview with one Malcolm X.
And bring about the freedom of these people by any means necessary.
The two had met in Harlem in 1959 after multiple failed attempts by Haley to land an interview with the black Muslim leader. Malcolm X was wary of the media, as earlier that year, CBS aired a one-sided account of the Nation of Islam entitled "The Hate That Hate Produced." Malcolm's first words to Haley were, "You're another one of the white man's tools sent to spy."
Businesses. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad has set up more businesses than any black man in America. He's not trying to build churches, he's trying to build businesses.
By 1962, however, it seemed the relationship between Malcolm and Alex had smoothed over, as Haley insisted that the Playboy interview was a chance for Malcolm's true words to be read by a primarily white audience. Malcolm acquiesced, but before either would agree to the interview, Playboy had to put in writing that Malcolm's responses would be printed verbatim. The magazine agreed, and Alex Haley's interview with Malcolm X appeared in the May 1963 issue of Playboy magazine.
You tell this to your camera, your TV man, your radio man.
Haley continued interviewing prominent black figures of the time, including Cassius Clay, Quincy Jones, and Sammy Davis Jr., and gained the title of chief interviewer for Playboy. Eventually, he would get the opportunity to interview who many considered the leader of the civil rights movement, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Alex had developed a real reputation among Black America. He was becoming a real household name. He knew athletes, he knew entertainers, he knew politicians. But of course, Martin Luther King was, the leading Black figure in America.
I say to you this afternoon that I would rather die on the highways of Alabama than make a butchery of my conscience.
Nailing down Reverend King for any lengthy period proved a monumental task for the now 43-year-old Haley. Alex's first two trips to visit King in Atlanta bore no fruit, as the civil rights leader was never in town for an extended amount of time. Haley even tried several times to catch King at the airport in between flights, with no success. Alex was aware that Dr. King was hesitant to be seen in a magazine that featured photos of nude women, but still pushed forward.
He's got a whole entourage of people who are coordinating his schedule. And the way to get to Martin Luther King in terms of wanting to schedule him for something is his secretary.
Haley finally got in touch with Dr. King's secretary, Dora McDonald, asking for any amount of time with the Reverend. McDonald made no promises, but she did point Haley in the direction of a church barbecue that King would be attending. Her advice to Alex was, let him see you there. Don't press. Haley attended the picnic, made his presence known, and was approached by Dr. King, who admitted that there was mutual interest in doing the interview for Playboy. Much like Malcolm X, it would afford Dr. King the means to get his message out to the middle-class whites who purchased the book every month. Dr. King agreed and granted Alex Haley what would be the longest interview he ever gave to any publication.
One of the questions Martin asks is how's Malcolm doing? You know, he wanted to know about his arch rival.
According to Haley, his most memorable interview for Playboy magazine was with the leader of the American neo-Nazi party at the time, George Lincoln Rockwell.
If two subjects came simultaneously, I had my choice of them. And they didn't do this on purpose, I know. It just happened. They had an editorial story conference, and they came out of it having decided that they would like to have an interview of the head of the Ku Klux Klan and the head of the American Nazi Party. And as I was chief interviewer, I had my pick. Well, I remember my first reaction was the obvious one, you know, how can they do such a thing, you know, and all that. But you know, I went home that night and I got to thinking about that thing rather seriously. And I look back upon it now as one of the more important things that ever happened to me. I began to realize now these people have named me chief interviewer. And what that would seem to say is that I am, in their view, their best interviewer. And so am I, when I'm presented with a challenge, going to cop out by saying my race disqualifies me, or am I going in and try to do the best job I can do? And I really got a new perspective from that. And I went then and did some little research. There was little I could find on the Klan gentleman. There wasn't much to suggest I could do any interchange with him at all. But when it came to the Nazi man, he was a man who had finished Brown University, which is not bad, who had become a Navy lieutenant commander, who had become a pursuit squadron commander, jet planes. And no matter how convoluted your political perspective might be, you cannot do all those things and be stupid. So I said I would like to try him. Mm-hmm. And I had this week of really challenging interview with the head of the Nazi Party. By the end of the week, you know, one thing, for instance, it intrigued me. He really was so into his perspective that he could hardly accept that I could do things that he didn't feel black people could do. I remember one time, for instance, I was trying to take notes, and I couldn't keep up with him. And I said, Commander, could I please use your typewriter? He had an early IBM electric. And he looked at me, he said, that's an electrical typewriter. And I said, well, I know, sir, I have one at home. And he said, well, go ahead. So I sat down, and you know, if you can type well, you can just show out on an electrical typewriter. And I had it bing, you know, the buttons going, all that. And he just stared at me with wonder. And after, I'd say, a half hour of continued questioning, he stopped. He said, I know what makes you intelligent. I know why you can do that. You've got white blood in you. Mm-hmm. And that became his understanding. And I later learned, as we went on, I really felt poignant for him because he was surrounded by people who were nowhere near his intellectual equal. He was a Brown University graduate surrounded by people, I doubt if any one of them had finished high school, and probably a lot of them maybe never finished grammar school. One of the quotes that he told me I never forgot was, he said, the easiest thing in the world to sell is hate. And that was what he was talking about, his men. He had recruited them with hate. Mm-hmm. And another thing I remember he said was, he had predicted violence, death. And he said, it won't be my enemies, it'll be some of these people here. I know them. And he was right. It was his first lieutenant, or one of them, who shot him to death one morning in a laundromat.
These are the victims of police bullets. And you don't take the victim in court as a criminal. You take the one who shot the victim in court.
The popularity of Malcolm X's Playboy interview prompted Haley to pursue a deeper dive into the life of the Black Muslim leader. When Alex pitched the idea of doing a biography on Malcolm X to his agent, the author was swiftly shut down as his agent feared that no one would publish a book on the controversial figure. Regardless, Haley persisted and pushed forward with his idea. To even begin with this new venture, Haley would first have to gain permission from Elijah Muhammad. The two met at a coffee shop, and by the end of their conversation, Haley was given the go-ahead.
They both lived in New York. Everything was happening in New York City. And so Malcolm would go over to Alex's apartment at very late at night.
As with their Playboy interview, Malcolm's statements would not be edited. And even though the two had previously worked together, the process of writing the biography didn't start off as smoothly as Haley had hoped.
There was a little bit of frustration between the two because Haley really wanted an autobiography. He wanted the personal story of Malcolm X. And Malcolm X was lecturing more, preaching about his beliefs, about the beliefs of Islam. And so there was a little bit of a mismatch there of maybe the vision of what the final product would be.
Trust had to be established because Malcolm, did not trust many people because of his background, because of his growing up, because of him being in the streets, because of him being in prison, because of all of those things. So he didn't trust a lot of people.
After many sessions of seemingly getting nowhere, a breakthrough.
At one point, I guess Haley hit the right button and he asked him about his mother and that kind of, I think it was, as I recall, it was late at night and they were tired perhaps, and then that kind of set Malcolm off on talking about his mother and how hard she worked, and something that he felt very deeply about and sentimental.
His mom's white. And that's what opened the floodgates. And I think that's when Alex Haley knew he had a story, because then he was able to tell him his whole life story from beginning to end, through chronology.
One day, out of the blue, about 4 o'clock in the morning, he gives a call and he says, "Hey, I trust you 70%," and just hangs up the phone.
And then that kind of set a little bit of a different tone, and that's when Haley got at the information that he wanted.
From 1963 to 1965, Alex Haley conducted more than 50 interviews with Malcolm X to gather stories, memories, and details for his book entitled The Autobiography of Malcolm X. In one of their final interviews, Malcolm told Haley, "I do not expect to live long enough to read this book in its finished form." His words proved prophetic. 2 weeks after the initial manuscript was finished, Malcolm X was assassinated while giving a speech to his Organization of Afro-American Unity at the Audubon Ballroom in Washington Heights, Manhattan. The event threatened the fate of Haley's first novel.
Doubleday canceled the publication after the assassination of Malcolm X because they felt it would be too controversial.
After shopping around his manuscript to more than a dozen different publishers, it was finally picked up by Grove Press.
It became a bestseller because, Malcolm was in the news and he had died so violently. And to this day, it's probably one of the best-selling memoirs of all time.
Released on October 29, 1965, The Autobiography of Malcolm X went on to sell more than 5 million copies. For Haley's next novel, he would draw inspiration from the stories he heard on the front porch of his childhood home in Henning, Tennessee.
He was doing a Playboy interview, and it was with this actress, Julie Christie, and he was going to meet her on the set of her movie, and she wasn't in the mood to meet with him. And this was in London. And so he leaves and he goes to this museum where the Rosetta Stone is located. And when he was looking at it, for whatever reason, it triggered this sense of wanting to know about the past and wanting to write about it.
In 1964, while still writing The Autobiography of Malcolm X, Haley pitched to his publisher, Doubleday, a novel about the history of his family dating back to their origins in Africa. With the working title of Before This Anger, Doubleday gave Haley an advance of $5,000 to begin research on his new book. Armed with only the misspelled name of Kunta Kinte and some phrases of an unknown African language, Haley embarked on his journey to learn more about his family tree. He visited many libraries that held information on slavery in America without much luck, until one day at a library in Washington.
When he went there, he just started looking at the microfiche and just looking at all of the different people who had been in slavery and things of that nature. And so I think he had spent like 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours there, and he really wasn't getting anywhere. And so he went down the hall and maybe he looked in a genealogy room of sorts and saw people who were just really engaged and looking and wanting to study. So he was like, no, there's something into this. Let me go back up. So he went back up and spent another couple of hours. And while he was there, that's when he saw the names of Kunta Kinte.
Spurred on by his research, Haley sought the help of linguist Jan van Sina, who informed him that the phrases in his possession were more than likely from the Mandinka tribe in Gambia, West Africa. With this new information, Alex Haley made his way to the village of Seafarer, where his ancestors once lived. There, the 70 or so residents of the village welcomed Haley with open arms.
They put him in the middle of a big circle, and they would take their kids, and give them to him one by one. And they were saying that we trust you, and we are welcoming you back into our country because you were taken as a descendant of a slave, and you have now returned back to our land, and we're glad to have you here.
And there was a village griot there that told Mr. Haley the history of his family and how Kunta Kinte was captured. He said he sit up and wrote for 3 days and 3 nights because he did not want to miss anything that the village griot had told him about his history.
I think that it was just an awesome and awestruck thing for him to get back to that place and to sit down and to hear those stories. And, you know, it was oral history then, so you had to listen, but I'm sure that it warmed his heart because family meant everything to him.
Haley's time with the village griot painted a picture of the past 500 years of his family. Haley said hearing the story of Kunta Kinte, a boy who left his village to chop wood to make a drum and never returned, was the most powerful moment in his life. The author's research did not end with the griot's teaching. While in Gambia, Haley spent time on a slave ship to get a sense of what his ancestors had to endure, a practice he would emulate during the writing of his novel as he spent time penning the book on cargo steamers as they sailed across the ocean. During the years of his research, Haley returned once again to Gambia, but the quest to complete his novel was taking its toll.
He had very little ties with his family, and he was ready to end it, but he kept it going. And I think he kept it going, as he put it, because his ancestors said, you know, you got to do this. You got to do this for us. You got to do this for all of the black slaves and the families that had to endure so much. And so that kept him going.
The process of writing his new book, now entitled Roots, The Saga of an American Family, took Alex Haley 12 years, a far cry from the 2-year deadline from Doubleday. The cost of his research totaled $96,000 and was funded in part by the owners of Reader's Digest. The magazine published 2 excerpts of Roots prior to the book's release, a book in the works up until the last possible moment.
As they were just ready to go to print, he was still making changes on the final copy. And that's why the book doesn't go all the way to him. You know, it stops because he just couldn't finish it.
Roots, The Saga of an American Family, was finally released on August 17, 1976, to favorable reviews. The novel debuted at number 5 on the New York Times bestseller list and landed in the number 1 spot by mid-November, where it stayed for a total of 22 weeks. Within 7 months, Alex Haley's new novel had sold more than 15 million copies.
Tonight, we present a landmark in television entertainment. Roots, the true story Alex Haley uncovered in his 12-year search across the 7 generations of his ancestry.
Produced concurrently to the book, Roots, the miniseries, was an 8-night television event chronicling Haley's newest novel. Beginning on January 23, 1977, Roots became appointment television for families across the country.
For those many, many nights, it was like the night before, they always left you engaged with something that would pull you back, and you had to get back to the TV, and the family sat down together to watch the TV to see exactly what was going to be coming on next. And it was heart-wrenching, you know, but people were engaged, and they wanted to see it. They wanted to know, and then they wanted to experience what families, you know, went through back in that time.
According to Haley, the ending to, in his opinion, the most powerful scene in the entire series wasn't in the script at all.
Sometimes miracles happen when you're filming. You can get the best writers in the world, the best directors, the best actors, the best everything, but you just simply cannot dream up and contrive that which will happen of its own sometime once in a great while. We were filming one morning in Savannah, Georgia. Everything went perfect. And the role played by Vic Lowndes, he's a beautiful guy, he played that overseer so evilly. I told Vic one morning, I'm sorry I created you. And he would say, what's your name, boy? And Kunta strung up would say, Kunta. And Vic would nod, the lash would hit 2 or 3 times. His body would just convulse under the force of the blows. And then again, what's your name? And again, Kunta, more blows. And it went on until it was perfectly apparent visually, he simply, physically, humanly could not survive anymore. And then weakly, LeVar said, Toby. And Vic turned triumphantly as the script called for and said, louder, let me hear it again, boy. And LeVar said just a little bit more loudly, Toby, massa. And then triumphantly, Vic turned and said, cut him down. And that was supposed to be the last dialogue, according to the script. And he was to be cut down, slumped, and we would throw the thing wide. But what happened was, the miracle was, when he was cut down, he did slump, as it called, and he went right into the lap of Lou Gossett, and we were all standing there. There must have been 50 of us standing around. The cameras are set, full of film, 3 cameras going from different angles, the sound boom right where it was supposed to be to pick up what had been said. And instead of Lou just sort of holding him so that we could go ahead and throw the camera out of focus, when we looked, there was Lou, veteran actor, tears streaming down his face, and it hadn't called for tears. And all of a sudden, Lou's mouth opens. And Lou began to talk, and this is almost heretic, and nobody said anything, not in the script. And out of Lou's mouth came, with emotion, what difference it makes what they called you? You knows who you is. You's Kunta. And then Lou convulsed, and he clutched him even more tightly, and he turned LeVar's head like a mother might an infant, very close to face to his, and he spoke words. He said, there's gonna be a better day. And there was a beat, and then he repeated it. He said, there's gonna be a better day. And there was just anguish in Lou Gossett's voice. And then there was a click, the last film ran through the cameras, and we used every scrap of it. And it was, without any question, the most powerful scene in the whole of Roots, I think.
No one anticipated it was going to have the success numerically that it did in terms of viewers.
An estimated 130 to 140 million unique viewers tuned into Roots, making it the most viewed television series in history. At that time, the finale drew in an estimated 100 million people.
It was true life for us, you know, and it was telling not only his story, but in a way it was telling the story of all of us.
It changed the way television thought of itself. It realized the impact, the potential it had to be a learning tool.
The impact of both the book and the miniseries led to an immediate cultural phenomenon of people digging into their own roots.
The only people prior to Roots looking up their ancestors were aristocrats, rich, white, old people, largely living in the East. And then all of a sudden, everyone wanted to trace their roots. And there became this whole new industry. And it was all because of Roots.
Roots' success made Alex Haley a household name.
He became a celebrity, and it was unusual for two reasons. One was he was an author, and we don't usually treat authors the way we treat actors or athletes. And that's the way he was being looked at. And of course, the other is that he was Black. And this was probably the first time in American history where we had a Black author who was being treated, who was looked at in the same way as a white author was.
With his newfound celebrity, Haley took Roots on a global expedition, but with notoriety came consequences.
While he's on this international global book tour, the first allegation comes to light, and it was from a British journalist. His newspaper, the Sunday Times, had sent him to where Alex Haley had said that his roots were from. But as he was starting to interview people who were associated, with the town and with the country, because they of course benefited this too economically, he began to see a lot of holes. And then he started to talk to other scholars and other people in the field, and it was clear to him that portions of the story, if not significant portions, were made up. And when he published his findings, Haley was at the apex of his career that it did very little to knock him down.
As a result of the Sunday Times findings, it was as if the floodgates had opened up on the credibility of Alex Haley's magnum opus.
Then there were other allegations coming forward, including the author Margaret Alexander, who had written Jubilee, which had come out 10 years prior to Roots. Similar story, and she had argued in court that the stories were too similar, that Haley ripped her off, and he owed her money. You see, the thing is Alex Haley's defense every time was that they're just jealous, and I've obviously I'm very successful. I've made millions of dollars and everyone wants it. And this is not unusual. I mean, this does happen. Every successful author can probably has a story to tell, but in Haley's case, everyone was coming out in droves. And so he kept using that defense, and it seemed to be working.
Until Harold Corlander, author of The African and many other works related to West Africa, opened the pages of Roots.
When he started reading Roots, he felt like he was reading his own book. When it was brought to court, the judge had actually, to prepare for the trial, read both books, and he saw the similarities. And that was concerning to Haley's lawyers. And in the end, they settled out of court. Haley had offered him $250,000, which at that time was a lot more money than it is now. But Corlander said, no, I want more. And they ended up settling for $650,000. That didn't have that much impact on Haley either, at least in terms of the general public. What did have impact is that other scholars began to see the cracks in his story, and he just wasn't being as held in high regard anymore.
In the years following Roots, Haley's minimal work output led credence to the scholar's beliefs.
He had written a couple articles. He had written forwards for several other authors who wanted to have his name attached to their book, but he was not able to replicate Roots. And I think part of it is he couldn't. I mean, it was just, again, it was such a monumental impact that there was just no way that anything that he wrote out after Roots would measure up.
In 1982, the World's Fair brought glitz, glamour, and culture to Knoxville, Tennessee. The 6-month extravaganza hosted exhibits from countries all over the world.
And it gives me great, great pride to introduce to you my co-host, Mr. Alex Haley.
To celebrate African American Day, Alex Haley joined in the festivities to share his wisdom.
I have this deep conviction
that history is something very living, actually, not something old and dry as dust, and I'm very, very much aware of how much we every day are part of the continuum of history.
While in Knoxville, Haley discovered the inspirational catalyst that would prompt him to make East Tennessee his new home.
My father had met him, I think they were both on the Tennessee Film Commission, and they had met in Nashville, and my father had invited him to see the Museum of Appalachia, and Alex, being the amazingly kind, generous human being that he was, said, "Sure, I'd love to come see the museum." And thinking in his mind, that is exactly what I do not want to do, is go see another boring museum. So then when he came to the World's Fair, my father ran into him again and said, "Hey, come out to the museum." And he said, "Okay." So we came. And halfway through going through the museum, he literally called his assistant, Jackie Naipo, in LA and said, "I'm moving to Tennessee."
There ought to be an exodus of people in this area up to that museum up there at Norris, simply because you cannot know the history of this region, which you ought to know, unless you can see it in some congealed form, such as that museum represents. It's one of the most impressive museums I have ever seen, and I travel much of this world.
Alex moved into a back bedroom in the Meyer home and quickly became like a member of the family.
He became like a father figure, an uncle figure for me, which was fabulous. He became like a brother to my mom. My father, it was interesting because my father was not a touchy-feely person at all. And Alex was the first man that I ever saw my father hug. You absolutely fell in love with him.
The author soon bought an old farm property down the road from the Myers in Clinton, Tennessee.
He had never actually owned a home, and at the age of 61 years, he purchased this home. He had never owned anything in his life, and when Mr. Haley purchased it, this house had been unoccupied for 30 years. The animals actually roamed freely in it. The house had no kitchen, no electricity, there was no bathroom or plumbing in the home.
Haley renovated the home, and captivated by the area and its people, he began research on a new novel.
A writer, like any other creative person, has instincts. They work involuntarily. You're not even thinking about it, but your instincts are at work, just like you in television or people in other things. And the more I moved around in East Tennessee, the more I began to feel book potential. It felt like a book. I am now in the early stage of research, and that is the one that you get just kind of poking around, not really digging into it, but I'm collecting things. Friends of mine who know I'm collecting things come up and save things and tell me. I was kind of pleased the other day when this past weekend I spent with Governor Alexander and his wife Honey. And the governor, as soon as we got together, he said, "Alex, I got one for you." He said, "All mountain graves face east." And he said, now the reason is the mountain people know it is in the Bible that God, when he returns, will come from the east. And so none of the mountain people want to have their backs to God when he comes. So all mountain graves face east. And I immediately had that on my little notebook, and it's in there, and I assure you that somewhere in this book that will appear.
The main thread of Haley's mountain tapestry would be the grandfather, a character who was fully realized in his imagination.
I know he is bearded, big beard. He knows virtually everything you can know about the mountains, you know, the little things. He knows, I'm fascinated, for instance, with walking around with people who know the mountains and hear them, you know, tell you about why this leaf looks like that, or why the bark is like this here, or why that little animal does such and so forth. All these are things this grandfather will know, as indeed the older men do know. I know very little about the grandmother yet, but I do know that she is going to be strong.
The author saw no trouble in approaching a story about a culture so different from his own.
Above everything else, I'd like to think of myself, if I had to state an order of priority, as a writer. Now, after that would come a black writer. I happen to be black, you know. I wish that we could come, we human beings, into a time when we would be less concerned about if somebody was black or yellow or red or something other. And I know that'll be a time to come, but I like to feel that one of the reasons I so much like East Tennessee is because I have found more of that tendency than I have found in most of the places I've been in the world.
Due to the popularity of Roots, television producers had already been in touch with Haley about his yet-to-be-written Appalachian epic, but the author wanted to make sure he did justice to his newly adopted home.
One of the things that I really enjoy now about being, a writer, say, who is recognized as such, is that when you start talking seriously a book you're going to write, you don't have to write the book. You don't have to write a word of it. But then you go start talking to the film people. And I've already been talking with the film people. We have pretty much blocked it out that the book I will be doing will probably be a 14-hour miniseries. The producer has already been here, and we've looked around the neighborhood, you know, and different other people. And we're kind of getting some concept of what this is going to be. And I know all I really can say is that I wanted to capture as best I can, to convey as best I can to the world as best I can what the culture of Appalachia is like, East Tennessee is like.
Haley would never see his Appalachian novel to fruition.
He walked out the door here of the White House and got into a car. He was going to speak at a university in Seattle, Washington.
You are watching News Channel 10, East Tennessee's news channel, your 24-hour source for news. This is Action 10 News at noon.
Good afternoon. Tennessee's most famous author died early this morning. Alex Haley suffered a probable heart attack and passed away in a Seattle, Washington hospital.
Haley was in Seattle for one of his many speaking engagements. Larry Cowley joins us from Seattle with a live report. Larry?
Adina, Alex Haley died here at Seattle Swedish Hospital shortly after midnight. The hospital spokesperson says it was a heart attack.
Alexander Murray Palmer Haley was 70 years old. The impact of his death reverberated in the place he had called home in his final years. Flags flew at half-mast all around Knoxville to mark his passing. Mayor Victor Ashe issued a statement calling Alex Haley a treasure who was able to make us imagine a more decent world and ask ourselves, why not? The citizens of Knoxville echoed the mayor's sentiment.
For African Americans, it has given us a sense of feel and a sense of pride about ourselves.
He was just one of the ones that showed that wherever you're from, you can stand up and feel good about yourself because first you are a person.
Those who got to know him during his time living in East Tennessee were hit especially hard by Haley's passing.
Alex Haley was one of the most beautiful men I ever seen in my life, I guess. He seemed to want to help people. In fact, I believe it did him more good to help someone else than it did for the person that he was helping.
Alex Haley's funeral was held at the Greenwood CME Church in Memphis. Hundreds turned out to recall Haley's life as a patriot and storyteller. Friend Lamar Alexander was one of the many to pay their respects.
When he came back to Tennessee, he gave of himself in an absolutely extraordinary way. He was among the most famous people in the world, and he would accept any invitation to go out to a school and make a little talk. He was really God's storyteller. I think everyone feels a great loss. I've been in Detroit, New York, Washington, D.C. this week. The school children know about Alex Haley. The papers are full of Alex Haley. His book on Malcolm X and Roots changed the way in America we look at our families, the way we look at ourselves.
Also among the mourning was the man who brought the character of Kunta Kinte to life, actor LeVar Burton.
He was famous for, when making a speech at some hotel, spending so much time in the kitchen where the help was. Whether you were a head of state or you washed dishes for a living, he always had time for you. Alex was all about family. He was family to all of us. And it's just really sad that he's gone. It's just really sad.
From Memphis, Haley's body was transported to his childhood home in Henning, Tennessee. People lined the streets as Alex Haley was laid to rest on the front lawn. Before his burial, a ritual was performed with roots in Haley's African heritage.
The family had brought back West African soil from the actual place where Alex's family is from. They sprinkled soil over Alex's body. The family had to dance around the open tomb in order for his spirit to be released.
Prior to his death, Haley was writing another story about the history of his family, specifically his grandmother's branch. Queen, the story of an American family, was finished by David Stevens, who used more than 700 pages of notes left to him by Haley, as well as many hours of conversation with the author. The dual-authored novel would go on to become a miniseries starring Halle Berry in 1993. Shortly after Haley's passing, Yvonne Easley, founder of the Appalachian African Americans Arts Organization, began lobbying for Alex Haley Square to be constructed in Morningside Park in East Knoxville. It would include a playground and a 13-foot bronze statue of Alex Haley.
Like this one, I think, is enormously significant. This man is much loved.
Sculptor Tina Allen was given the Herculean task of creating the statue in the likeness of Mr. Haley. Completing Haley Square would take plenty of funding, and before long, both Allen and Yvonne Easley found themselves overseas in Paris at the 1993 Glamour Jazz Celebration to raise money for their project. The two received plenty of international support.
I never thought in a million years we would be in Paris doing what we're doing. It's because people love Mr. Haley. They love what he represents.
Paris and France in general has had a historical legacy of appreciating the full talent of a person.
La raison c'est dans deux mots. Alex Haley.
Many of Haley's friends and admirers made the trip to Paris to lend their support, including actress and Haley's love interest in Roots, The Next Generation, Mrs. Lee Chamberlain.
Alex understood that if one of us is suffering, then we are all capable of suffering. And if one of us is happy, then we're all capable of being happy. And that's what I got from him most. He was just there's no pretensions.
While Easley and Allen pressed forward, there were still questions about what to do with Mr. Haley's land.
There was a group of developers that wanted to turn it into a golf course with, housing for people to come and golf and spend the weekend. And I just shudder every time I think about that, because this place is such a special place. It's almost like sacred ground.
In 1994, the nonprofit child advocacy organization, the Children's Defense Fund, purchased the Haley estate. The property was to be used as a retreat for the CDF's programs, and they made sure their mission fit Alex Haley's vision.
We have our Freedom Schools reading program, which we create the curriculum, we provide it to organizations throughout the nation, and then we want those instructors, those literacy coaches, to come here and understand the legacy of Alex Haley, telling stories, bringing those stories to life.
We have young people from all over the country who come here for training in the hopes that they can take up the torch that was left to them to carry.
We want to open up the potential for all those children and all the potential for all Americans. And I think that's something else that Alex Haley helped us to understand.
We think that the Haley Square site is a catalyst for future growth and development in our community.
Aside from a few setbacks from the city of Knoxville, things were moving smoothly for the project. And by 1997, construction was well underway on Haley Square. Residents from all over Knoxville came together to build the playground, complete with structures from the imagination of some local children.
This looks really familiar because when I drew my picture, I had like a cone thing, and so it's really neat.
And on November 27, 1997, the Alex Haley statue finally arrived at its new home in Morningside Park as Tina Allen looked on like a worried mother. Despite all the setbacks, Allen was proud to see it finally at home in Knoxville.
When you have somebody that loved the town as much as Alex loved this town, and you see a town that's primarily a white community and a black community come together to say, you're just a great citizen, we're not going to forget you, it makes you feel like personal effort pays off. It looks like Gulliver's Travels.
Set to be unveiled in the spring, Yvonne Easley hoped the statue would inspire Knoxvillians with Alex Haley's mantra.
It's an example, and that's what we want to do, just set an example of find the good and praise it.
Our sensitivity is bigger, our courage is bigger, our tolerance is bigger.
On April 24th, 1998, years after the initial vision, the Alex Haley statue at Alex Haley Heritage Square was set to be unveiled.
It's a legacy for Alex, but it's a legacy for everybody.
In life, East Tennessee was Alex Haley's adopted residence, with the unveiling of the statue that became his everlasting home. At the time, the Alex Haley statue was the largest statue to pay tribute to an African American in the country, and Roots actor Louis Gossett Jr. felt it was only fitting.
Here you sit in front of the #1 community in America. To tell your stories for many, many generations.
85 to bed, 90,000, now 95. 95,000 to bed, now 100,000. 100,000, now 105, there it goes, it can be yours. Fair warning at 100,000, but 105. About 100,000.
In October 1992, Alex Haley's belongings were put up for auction to offset some of the debt that was left behind after his death. Items such as research materials, notes from his Playboy interviews, and original manuscripts were among the more than 500 items up for sale.
This collection was acquired in 1991. The special collections director at that time worked with Alex Haley, and he agreed to donate the bulk of his materials, which he did before he passed away unexpectedly in 1992. At that time, the rest of the estate was put up for auction, and so the University of Tennessee went to donors and raised the money to purchase additional materials. He had strong ties to Tennessee and the university and felt that this was the right place for it.
Containing photos of his trip to Gambia, notes on the Roots miniseries, and original drafts from Mr. Muhammad Speaks, the Haley collection at UT is a massive treasure trove of the author's history, with much still to be uncovered.
It's about 100 linear feet. That is of the processed material that we received in 91 and 92. But in 2019, we received an additional approximately 100 linear feet from the family, the descendants of Alex Haley.
With such a notable gathering of documents, the Haley collection at the University of Tennessee has proven to be an invaluable resource for researchers and scholars alike.
Alex Haley is a significant author of the state of Tennessee, and to have his papers where researchers can come use them, students do come use our collections, but then we have researchers come from all around the world as well to use our collections. So that is a huge draw.
One item that was not sold at the auction held important historical significance and lay untouched for almost 3 decades. The desk where Alex Haley wrote his many works.
And it ended up at an auction facility in Johnson City, Tennessee. And no one really wanted it. After 30 years in 2022, a Memorial Day, I get a phone call, would the center be interested? And I said, yes, of course.
The Appalachian African American Cultural Center is located in Pennington Gap, Virginia. Converted from an old one-room schoolhouse, the center is home to artifacts from all facets of Black Appalachian history. And now, the desk of Alex Haley, which came with the surprising price tag.
The desk was $100. With tax, it was $109.50. And that's the desk and the credenza. I can only imagine sitting at that desk and putting your ear to it and just hearing Alex Haley as he sat there and all of his creative juices flowing and writing of roots. Queen, the Autobiography of Malcolm X, and all the writings he did for Reader Digest. You know, it's just amazing of all the writings and the work that Alex Haley did. And I just hope in some way that this center can just keep his legacy alive.
When you sit and look at it, Alex has an extremely impressive legacy. He's looked at one of our minority leaders, someone who was able to break ground so early. If you think, again, of where the United States and even just the military was in the 40s and 50s, a lot of restrictions for African Americans, and he was able to kind of break through a lot of those.
Probably the only bad thing I ever heard about him is that, you know, if he told you he'd be here at 1 o'clock, it might be 3 or 4, because he was so kind to everyone along the way. Everywhere you go, you leave a footprint and you leave something better than before you arrived. Anyone that he came in contact with was better off after they came in contact with him.
It is argued that he had as much impact on improving race relations in America as much as Martin Luther King. I don't think that there's an event in the 1970s with regards to civil rights and race that has had much impact than Roots did. And so for that alone, I think, you know, he needs to be acknowledged.
That story resonated not only with black people, but it resonated with white people, red people, brown people. It resonated with everybody because all of us have a history.
I have a saying that's on it's a sort of a credo of mine. And it's not original to me. I was driving one day in Los Angeles and I saw on a bumper sticker ahead of me the words, "Find the good and praise it." And I believe in that. So I guess what I would like to be most remembered for is the fact that in my writing, in my efforts, as much as I could, I tried to find the good and praise it.